Okay, so I'm going to talk about necessity of interaction in combinatorial auction. Let's just start with this fundamental question. We have some limited resources and we want to allocate it between individuals, and how to do that. So this is a very standard question, and there are many different aspects to this question. It's inherently an optimization problem. If you think about it, it's actually it's a distributed optimization problem because the input is not centralized at the hand of one person, but in fact each person has their own preferences, so no one in the auction knows exactly what is the exact input, so the input is distributed across the play. And also there are other aspects to this problem, like the strategic behavior of the players, etc. But through this talk, I'm really going to focus on this distributed nature of the problem and think of it as some distributed optimization problem. This means that the players are going to be cooperative. So this is the question really we want to understand. Do we need any interaction between the players in order to determine an efficient allocation, or interaction is not necessary? And to think about this, think of non-interactive protocols or algorithms that each bidder will write its own preferences or some information about the preferences, and will just send it to a central party who will just look at that and will find the allocation. Or in the interactive settings, the bidders will bid, and then someone will see the bid, will decide, okay, I'm going to change my strategy, and this will go on like a conversation, really. So the setting formally is as follows. We have n bidders and m items, and each bidder will have some valuation over a subset of items. Now the valuation function is going to be normalized and monotone, but more importantly, I'm going to assume it is subadditive. So it will subadditive valuations will contain lots of interesting cases like submodular functions, etc. But the main reason that I'll do this is because of, if I don't make this assumption, the problem is going to be intractable. And then what is the problem really? Now you want to find an allocation of these items such that the summation of valuation of players for the allocated item is maximized. Now in the distributed setting, as I said, the valuation of each player is just a private information to that player, and so the players need to communicate with each other so that they know how to solve the problem. Because we want to understand the role of interaction, let's just put some structure over this communication. So the communication is going to happen in rounds. In each round, each bidder simultaneously with everyone else will broadcast a message to everyone. So you can think about it that each bidder will write something on a board, and then simultaneously everybody will show this board. Everyone will have the same state of the knowledge at the end of the round except for their private input. And then we are going to continue this over round. After the last round, the coordinator is just going to look at these communicated messages and use that to find the allocation. So this is the setup. And a main measure here is the communication cost that we are incurring in this protocol. Basically, what we want the players to communicate only polynomially many bits, because after that it's going to be infeasible, really. So let's see what we can do with a non-interactive protocol. The most obvious choice is that each player will just write its own valuation and send it to the central planner. The good thing is that you'll get an exact answer or some small approximation. The problem with that is that you are communicating exponentially many bits. Okay? So this is clearly infeasible. Okay. What is the other extreme? Let's ask each player to represent their own input by some polynomial representation, and just send the representation to a central planner. The good thing is that clearly now this is going to be a polynomial communication, but if you think about it, you are getting some exponentially large object, compressing it down to a polynomial, and so it's going to lose a lot in its accuracy. And what's going to happen is that we know the best thing you are going to get out of this is at most a root term approximation. Now, the very interesting fact is that you can actually do better than both of these results. There's this nice result by Dobzhinsky et al. That showed that you can actually get significantly better than the previous approach. You can get an m to the 1/3 approximation using a polynomial communication. So this means that this problem is not about just summarizing your input. You can do something much more clever than just summarizing your input. However, there is a bad news here that still, while you can do something better than the naive approaches, you cannot go and get an efficient allocation. And for the purpose of this talk, think of an efficient allocation as some constant or some polylogarithmic approximation. What you're going to get here is at most some m to the 1/4 approximation. But on the other hand, we know for quite some time that you can get interactive protocols that will get efficient allocation. In particular, we know you can get a 2 approximation with polynomial communication, and this will require polynomially many rounds of interaction also. So let's go back to this question. Do we need interaction? It seems yes, because if we don't do interaction, we don't get an interesting result. If we do interaction, we'll get this interesting result. Are we done? We want to argue that no. So now the next step is to understand how much interaction do we need between these players. And the main reason is that really interactivity is not a 0-1 thing. It's this wide spectrum. In one end, we have these protocols who do not interact with each other at all. In the middle, we have protocols that people are still deciding in parallel, and from time to time checking with each other to come up with some decision. And in the other endpoint, we have these protocols that people are really engaging in conversation back and forth. They'll talk until they'll come up with some answer. Okay. So the 2 approximation protocol that I say, and in fact most of other works we have there belong to the other extreme. They require tons and tons of back and forth conversation between the players. And even in the best case, they are going to happen in these scenarios that one player has to wait for all other players to talk before it's going to be this player's turn to even participate inside the action. And if you think about it in an action with even 1,000 players, this is going to be also as infeasible as communicating something which is an exponential size. However, we have this. We now know that you can get a slightly weaker approximation guarantees with a dramatically smaller number of rounds. So Dobzhinsky et al. Have this amazing result that you can get a polylog m approximation in a smaller than log m rounds of interaction. Okay, so if you relax your goal slightly, if you are happy with the polylog m approximation, then you don't need that much interaction. You can do it within log m rounds of interaction. And in fact, we know this result in forms of, for any specific number of rounds, we know how much, what is the best, or we know an approximation algorithm that for any fixed number of rounds, it's going to get some form of m to the 1/r approximation. And so it means that for any additional round, we know how to improve the approximation guarantee. So for this long introduction, this is going to be the summary of the previous work. We know that in subadditive combinatorial action, only logarithmic number of rounds is enough to get some good approximation with polynomial communication. And so let's ask this question, that how much interaction is necessary really? Do I need something like logarithmic number of rounds, or maybe I can do it in just some large constant or something better than log? And in fact, a conceptually similar question has also been asked for unit demand actions, and there are these results there that we know you need something like log m rounds of interaction, and also log m rounds are sufficient. But these results do not carry over between the two settings. The two settings are conceptually similar, but technically you need different types of ideas. And just to point out, this problem, in fact, was cast as open problem both by Dobzhinsky et al. And later by Alon et al., who studied the case for unit demand actions. So our main result is a tight resolution of this open problem. We'll show that you really need log m rounds of interaction also if you want to get any efficient allocation, and with polynomial communication. Formally, if you have any deterministic or randomized protocol which achieves a polylog m approximation with polynomial communication, it necessarily needs to spend at least log m over log m rounds also, which, as we saw, this is tight up to constant factors. And in fact, we can show this similarly for any fixed number of rounds. We get something of the forms m to the 1 over r is the best approximation you can get. And this is not quite tight by the upper bound, but asymptotically they look the same. So let me, the rest of the talk, briefly tell you how to get such a result. So this is going to be a communication complexity lower one. And the way to do that is we are going to design this distribution which half of the times creates yes instances, half of the time creates no instances, with the property that in yes instances, the value of social welfare is something like m to the 1 over times larger than no instances. This means that if you can estimate the value of social welfare, then you are able to also distinguish between yes and no cases of this distribution. And then we are going to show that distinguishing between yes and no cases of this distribution requires lots of communication, something super polynomial. And so the main idea here is to first prove something for one-round protocols. One-round protocols or simultaneous protocols, they are easy to reason about typically. And so we'll prove something directly for them. Then after that, we are going to show that if the problem is hard for R-round protocols, it necessarily means that it's hard for R plus 1 round protocols with some loss in the approximation. And more importantly, the dimension of the problem changes when you go from one round to the next round. So if the problem is hard over, let's say, 100 players and 100 items in 10 rounds, then we have to prove that it's hard over 1,000 players and 1,000 items for the 11th round version of the problem. And this is the fact that makes it a slightly non-standard compared to typical round elimination argument you use. So the proof is going to become technical and messy at some point, so I'm just going to talk about a very high-level overview of how to do this thing. So we want to prove some lower bound for R-round protocols, and let's assume inductively that we know the problem is hard for R-1 round protocols. Take your 1,000 players in R-round protocols and partition them into groups of 100 players, which we know 100 is the enough number of players that we know are hard in R-1 round. So my players are going to be partitioned into these blue groups and red groups. The numbers in each group are enough number of players to make the problem hard in the R-1 round version of the problem. Now, conceptually, each player sees himself playing in exponentially many instances of the problem, which are supposedly hard in the R-round version. What it means that if you are a player here, you see this exponential, you see one instance, exponentially many instances, and in that instances are this set of items, and your input is coming from a distribution which is hard for R-1 round protocols. Now, I'm cheating here really in this picture. There's no way that you can pack exponentially many instances of a problem in an instance which is only polynomially larger. You'll run out of items here. So the real picture is something like this, that the instances you have will actually have tons of overlap with each other. But what we want them to conceptually look like something like this. And this is going to be you need some real complicated embedding to make these instances look like independent of each other, while there are tons of intersection between them. But for our purpose, let's really think of these instances to be independent of each other. Okay, so now look at one group. You have these exponentially many instances to play with. Let's make one of those instances a special. And when we make an instance a special, in the actual input, we are going to map the items in the special instance to a unique set of items and map all the other items to the same set of elements. So what this means, or basically what is a special about these special instances, is that if you look at here, the players in the blue group really need to solve the problem in this specific instance. All the other items are so small that even if I allocate them optimally between the groups, nobody is going to benefit anything substantial. So the blue group now really have to find a good way of allocating the items inside this blue void or inside this blue instance between themselves. So the bidders in the blue group has to solve a hard R-1 instance problem. But what do we know? Think of one specific, only one player. The player is given exponentially many instances. There is nothing special in those instances that tell him that this is the instance you need to solve. So if you are not communicating enough, you are not able to tell anything interesting about your special instance. So after the first round, what is happening is that basically you know this was the special instance, but you know nothing about what is happening inside that special instance. So more formally, if I have a protocol, and if I condition on its first message, I'll get an object which has to solve the R-round version of the problem in R-rounds without having any extra knowledge, really. And so we may think that this is contradiction. And why this such? Okay. So to prove formally that this is a contradiction, you have to say that this object that is a protocol condition on its first message, we can simulate it using another protocol in R-1 round and get a protocol that actually can solve the problem in R-1 round, which we know now inductively that was not possible. And this is really the main part of the proof, because if you have a protocol and you condition on first message, you don't get necessarily a protocol. It's going to be some object. And so now the players has to simulate something which is not a protocol without any communication with each other in R-1 round. And I'm not going to get into details of this thing. You can ask me offline if there is any question here. Okay. But let me summarize. So Dobzhinsky et al. Previously showed that you need some modest amount of or a modest amount of interaction is enough for you to get a good approximation or a good allocation. And modest amount, really think of it as logarithmic in the auction size. In this work, we showed that you also need this amount of interaction. And so this will settle the problem for the case of subadditive and in fact even XOS valuations. But the problems remain open. For example, for submodular valuation, can we prove any interesting lower bound there, or can we perhaps improve the upper bound if I know my valuation functions are only submodular? And also, I think a very interesting open question is can we actually improve the gap between the lower bound and upper bound in the unit demand case? And that's it. Thank you.